Long before anyone called it America, this continent was home to civilizations that had thrived for thousands of years. Nations like the Iroquois Confederacy, the Cherokee, and the Powhatan governed complex societies, traded across vast distances, and understood the land not as property but as life itself. When European powers arrived, they saw opportunity. England, a latecomer to the New World, was relentlessly ambitious. The first English colonies, Jamestown and Plymouth, were fragile experiments. Disease and starvation nearly wiped them out. Survival was never guaranteed. But slowly the colonies endured. By the early 1700s, they had transformed. The South flourished with agriculture, the North was dominated by trade, and the middle colonies became cultural melting pots. Colonial assemblies formed, newspapers spread ideas, and a sense of independence grew long before anyone imagined political independence. Most colonists still considered themselves British, celebrating the King's birthday and fighting in Britain's wars. But an ocean separated obedience from experience. Britain ruled, but it rarely listened. The French and Indian War changed everything. Britain fought to defend colonial interests, but then demanded the colonies help pay for it. Taxes were imposed not as a partnership, but as a punishment. The Stamp Act of 1765 wasn't just a tax, it was a message. Parliament ruled absolutely. Colonial outrage was immediate. Protests erupted. Effigies were burned. Merchants boycotted British goods. The act was repealed, but the trust was broken. With each new law, resistance hardened. Pamphlets circulated and coffeehouses buzzed with debate. Enlightenment ideas about natural rights and self-rule spread like wildfire. Thomas Paine's Common Sense sold hundreds of thousands of copies, openly calling monarchy a fraud. For the first time, independence was spoken aloud. But speaking was easier than acting. Rebellion meant treason, and treason meant death. Many hesitated. Merchants feared losing trade, farmers feared their homes would be burned, and nearly a third of the population remained loyal to the crown. America wasn't united. It was fractured. By 1775, compromise had failed. War was inevitable. Few believed the colonies could win. Britain's army was the most disciplined in the world, and its navy controlled the seas. The colonies had no money, no factories, and no allies. Independence wasn't a plan, it was a gamble, and the price of losing would be extinction. After the French and Indian War ended in 1763, the colonies experienced what looked like peace, but beneath the surface, tension was growing. Britain, buried in debt from the war, decided the colonies should help pay for it. From London, this was logical. From the colonies, it felt like a betrayal. For decades, the colonies had largely governed themselves. This period of salutary neglect had allowed a strong sense of independence to grow. When Britain suddenly tightened its grip, the shock was profound. The Sugar Act of 1764 was the first warning. It cracked down on smuggling and bypassed colonial courts. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. Then came the Stamp Act of 1765, which required an official stamp on everything from legal documents to playing cards. The reaction was explosive. Crowds gathered, tax collectors were threatened, and the Sons of Liberty emerged as a powerful resistance movement. For the first time, the colonies acted together. Britain repealed the Stamp Act, but then passed the Declaratory Act, stating it had full authority over the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The message was clear. Resistance would not change imperial control. As the conflict deepened, ideas became as powerful as armies. Pamphlets and essays flooded the colonies, arguing that liberty was a natural right, not a gift from kings. In 1767, the Townshend Acts imposed new taxes on imported goods like glass, paper, and tea. Again, boycotts spread, with women playing a crucial role by producing homemade goods. British troops were sent to Boston to enforce order, turning the city into a powder keg. On March 5, 1770, the tension exploded. A confrontation between colonists and soldiers escalated and shots were fired. 5 civilians lay dead in the snow. Colonial leaders immediately seized the moment. Paul Revere's famous engraving depicted British troops firing mercilessly into a helpless crowd. The incident became known as the Boston Massacre, a powerful symbol of tyranny. Public opinion shifted further against Britain. Even when Parliament repealed most of the Townshend taxes, the tax on tea remained a quiet reminder that Parliament still claimed the right to tax them. By the early 1770s, something irreversible had happened. The colonies were no longer just resisting taxes, they were forming a new political identity. People who once thought of themselves as British subjects began to see themselves as Americans. The line between protest and revolution was fading. In London, British leaders underestimated the danger. In the colonies, many still hoped for compromise. But history had already shifted. The struggle was no longer about taxes. It was about power, identity, and the right to decide one's own future. By 1774, the relationship between Britain and the American colonies had reached its breaking point. In response to the Boston Tea Party, Parliament passed what became known as the Intolerable Acts. Boston's port was closed. Massachusetts's charter was altered, stripping citizens of self-government. British officials accused of crimes could now be tried in England. These acts were not just punishment for Boston. They were a warning to all colonies. If Britain could crush Massachusetts, it could crush anyone. But instead of isolating Massachusetts, the Intolerable Acts united the colonies like never before. In September 1774, representatives from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress. They condemned British actions, organized a new boycott, and agreed that if Britain used force against Massachusetts, the other colonies would support it. They still hoped for reconciliation, but they also began preparing for war. Militias started drilling, and weapons were stockpiled. In April 1775, British troops marched from Boston to Concord to seize those weapons. On April 19th at Lexington, a shot rang out, the shot heard round the world. Fighting spread to Concord, and along the road back to Boston as colonial militias ambushed British troops from behind trees and stone walls. The British suffered heavy casualties. The American Revolutionary War had begun. News of the fighting spread like wildfire. Thousands of militia members surrounded Boston, placing the city under siege. In May 1775, the Second Continental Congress met. This time the situation was far more serious. They created a Continental Army and appointed George Washington as its commander. Though still hoping for peace, the colonies were now organizing for a full-scale war. Britain responded by declaring the colonies an open rebellion. By 1776, America was at war, but what were they fighting for? Many colonists still hoped for reconciliation. But British attacks intensified, cities were burned, and the king declared the colonies to be rebels. Independence was no longer unthinkable. It was becoming necessary. The idea of breaking away from the world's most powerful empire was terrifying. But Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, changed everything. In clear, simple language, Paine argued that monarchy was unjust and independence was logical. It transformed a radical idea into a popular cause. In June 1776, the Second Continental Congress faced a historic decision. A committee, including Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin, was appointed to draft a formal Declaration of Independence. Jefferson, drawing on Enlightenment ideas, wrote the first draft. He argued that governments exist to protect natural rights, and when they fail, the people have the right to abolish them. The document listed grievances against King George III and formally declared independence. On July 4, 1776, Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence. With this act, the colonies made an irreversible statement. They were no longer seeking reform. They were creating something new. The Declaration proclaimed them free states, with the power to wage war, form alliances, and govern themselves. It was a formal announcement of revolution. The Declaration didn't end the war, it intensified it. But it also defined the ideals of the American cause: liberty, equality, and the right to resist tyranny. What began as a resistance to taxes had evolved into a revolutionary claim about human rights. By signing the Declaration, the leaders of the colonies risked everything. Failure meant execution. But they believed the cause was worth the cost. The colonies were now the United States of America, not yet secure, not yet victorious, but finally free in principle. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history.